And before we could go to the case study, I just want to reiterate again and echo the issues we discussed in the last session. The fact that the internal conflicts are becoming increasingly. And what is very clear about these internal conflicts is the consequence and the impact of these internal conflicts. They tend to be even more destructive than the hostility between the states. And this is basically because the way the civil wars are fought, internal wars are fought, are quite specific to the people's livelihood and their livelihood base and even social fabric. And especially the counter-insurgency warfare strategy, if you look to it, is clearly a strategy to deny the insurgents access to the resource from the communities. And that's why communities are becoming a target to deny and it's a very good example. I mean, it happened in many places whereby to deny this insurgent access has a lot of impact on the peoples. And even sometimes people are used against each other so that to weaken the insurgent. And that's the counter-insurgency warfare is a big issue that when we talk about the conflict generally, we need to refocus on the way the civil wars are fought. I think we did some work in South Sudan, and I think there's an article that I wrote for the African Affairs on the social capital and civil war, of which I look at the perception of the people. How do they see the war itself? Is it the war between the governments and the insurgents, or the counterinsurgency? A very high number of people, and especially the communities, they say actually the counterinsurgents is the real risk for them than the war between the governments and the insurgents. And I think there's a lot of literature about the counterinsurgency warfare, and one of the things that I refocus again to see what it is counterinsurgency. And I identify two types of counterinsurgency, the exogenous and endogenous. Sometimes the government could use the people to be against themselves, or to use people against different communities against other communities. And there is this issue of information asymmetry. And in most cases, the indigenous counterinsurgency emanating from within the communities tend to have a detailed information about each other. And even when they target the countries, when they start targeting, the target is specifically for specific people. And that's why an exogenous counterinsurgency sometimes tends to bring people together, rather than the indigenous counterinsurgency is dividing people. And I think we documented with a lot of in-depth information to compare these counterinsurgency.
Luka, maybe I could just make a comment here to illustrate that. I think that in Guatemala, the government required all males between about 17 and 40 in the rural areas to become part of civil patrols. They were actually mandatory, and if you resisted, you would probably be killed. These civil patrols were 99% Mayans, and they were to really patrol the villages and be kind of a barrier against counterinsurgency. They also carried out a majority of the killings. So in an area where the NGO I worked around an area called Rabinal, a municipality, meaning a county, there were about 5,000 Mayan deaths in that area, and about 4,500 of them were actually committed by pack members, by Mayans killing other Mayans. And they were being encouraged to steal their cattle or steal anything from their homes or burn their homes, rape the women that were the objects of the violence. So now, really 20 years after the war ended, you go to a church in Rabinal, and the pack members may be sitting, families may be sitting side by side with the victims. So the trauma kind of continues. It's very very complicated healing those situations when they kind of basically were neighbor on neighbor kinds of insurgency strategy, and it's made it very very complicated to actually affect healing compared to the Civil War in El Salvador, which was really the government versus the guerrillas, and reconciliation there has been much easier.
And I think that's a very, even in the case of Sudan, Dinka, this is a major ethnic group, and they use some of the Dinka, leaders of the rebels, to be fighting against the other rebel, and these people actually they were so destructive in the 90s, but the government also used the Arab militia, because what is happening, and I will show it later on. You know, the Sudan and Southern Sudan, you have a belt, and after the separation, there is this desertification, and there's actually the livelihoods of these nomads are becoming so bad, and they were looking for off-taking activities, and that's why the government used the Arab nomads with counterinsurgency in the south, and they created a lot of things. And I will come to issue of Abyei, what happened with these atrocities being committed, and the perception of the people how to have a relationship with their neighbors becoming so difficult. So, and I think this is very important when we look at a lot of work has been done on the issue of social capital in the context of civil war. And these are the things that are very important when you come to the post-conflict, how you deal with such communities. And sometimes we tend to undermine the hidden tension within these communities. We managed to measure the level of mistrust and the breakdown of social fabric, and especially in the context of the nomadic tribes, and especially in the context of Sudan, there are certain indicators that we could use in order to measure that on the level of mistrust. And one of the things that we use is, for example, in these communities, they are quite supportive of each other. And I use the famine occurred in 1998. And what usually happens is that these communities, they have a support mechanism whereby even a rich person can be able, you have the right actually, for example, if you have a livestock or a cattle, and you are in a situation of famine, of almost dying, you can go and spear at the cattle of the region, and it automatically is given to you. Even sometimes you can litigate. You can go to the court, and you ask that rich person to help you. Because it is for the Dinka, they believe the wealth is entrusted to you by God. It is not yours. You are just actually. So they have a very sophisticated way of looking at the so. But I was looking what happened, whether they open cases in the court or not, so that you can gauge the level of what happened to the kinship support during the war, and you could see clearly it was getting down, especially for those in the indigenous counterinsurgency warfare. So, but definitely behind this one also the whole of assets and a very clear case of looting, the number of cattle looted by either of them, targeting the livestock of the people. But the interesting part is the level of vulnerability and poverty, because we look at these dynamics and transitional public dynamics, because there are certain statistical way you can see what happened about who enters the poverty line and who came out. Although the level of poverty increased substantially during the war, but it was so profound, it was so dominant among the non-poor. In actually, the poor become even more vulnerable than the poor, because what happened is that the adapting mechanism during the war, you tend to go to the basics, and in most cases, the poor families tend to be more resilient than the rich one, than the non-poor. And also the non-poor, they tend not to, because the target of their assets, making them even very vulnerable, but for the sake of this counterinsurgency warfare. So really moving away from the traditional assumption, the more you are rich, the more you can be able to manage risk. In this context, is actually the reverse. You become even more vulnerable than the and this has a lot of implication later on issues of healing and how you look positive to the So this is the basis upon which I want to. But really, we need to look at the transition justice has a process, and you have troubled societies in most cases. You have social destruction, trauma. And then after the emerging from conflict, now we have these compelling issues: truth-telling and justice-seeking. In most cases, these two things, if are not handled properly, it will get you back to the war again. And it's a very complicated one. And I think there's a lot of debate about what to do. But even if you have a truth-telling and justice, in fact, you can influence them through this psychological adjustment or reconstruction. In most cases, in the post-conflict, people tend to focus on this reconstruction, the physical, rather than the psychological adjustment. And I think there's a problem in most cases whether you can be able to if you focus on the reconstruction, it's very difficult for you to achieve the reconciliation. And this is what is happening in Southern Sudan today, because the way we have been looking at the eruption of tension and conflict between the communities is the way we have been dealing with the hidden tension and the trauma that people are facing. And I'm going to take example of Abyei as a case study to see this issue of trauma and transitional justice. The focus really is to see the challenge to intercommunal cooperation, reconciliation, peace, and establishment in Abyei. And we selected Abyei specifically because that is Sudan. I don't have the pointer here to be sure. There's no pointer here. But let me...
The thing that advances slides will point if you ask that. No, I'm sorry, the little...
Oh, yeah, well, let me use this one. Yeah. Here, this is Sudan, and this is the African continent. And Abyei is just this one. It is actually between the two countries of Sudan and Southern Sudan after the secession. But the status of this area is not yet divided. It is here. It is not yet decided. So it's still in a situation of, they're supposed to have, after the peace agreement, this area is supposed to have a referendum together with the people of the South. That one did not happen. The majority of the people along here, we have the nomadic tribes of the of Arab Syria. The one I was telling you, they were used for counterinsurgency. Counterinsurgency warfare to these people. So there was a peace agreement. These people here, they were given a right of self-determination through a referendum. And what happened, the referendum did not take place because the two countries, they differed who to vote in this area. Because this area, we differed. I was actually representing the government of the South in international arbitration to decide the areas of the Ngok Dinka that were transferred in 1905 from here, from the South to the North. Now these people here, they want to go back to the South. So there was an agreement for them to have a referendum. And that referendum, the two countries differed. In actual fact, there's oil here. This is really complicated the whole thing. It's almost, what is in that area, there's almost about 80% of the oil. That is, 80% is actually supporting the budget of Sudan. So it's even making it very complicated to allow. So Sudan government is saying, for these people to vote, the Arab nomads must vote also. And you know, the Arab nomads are majority in terms of because they usually come transition, they come in. This is what I was saying, that this zone is actually this where you have a lot of desertification here in the north, Darfur is here. So in actual fact, Southern Sudan took almost about 80% of the vegetation of Sudan. And this area is facing, because of the lack of referendum, they were attacked in 2008. They were attacked again in 2011. There is a big, actually I came from New York, a big demonstration. People that wanted to have a referendum. So the study was conducted in this area. This area was, actually this is what I was saying, it was affected also by the counterinsurgency here. So and so it's a very strategic area. It can play a very good role in building the relationship between Sudan and South Sudan. But its political stake is now under the two countries with a lot of interest. And as you could see clearly, even the South, the South has a lot of oil. And this oil can only be passed through Sudan. They have the pipeline here. They don't have, this is a landlocked country. And because they want to have a pipeline through Ethiopia to Djibouti, it will take them some years. So the South is even constrained to what level can negotiate with the Sudan in order to solve the issue of Abyei. So it's an area in limbo. It's an area, a flashpoint, and at any time can create a lot of problems. So this is an area where we do the Kush institution actually established. Conducted the survey. Now, so this is the context that I was describing to you about the peace agreement and what happened to these people. And actual massive displacement happened. About 150,000 people got displaced. And so it's the same thing about the... But the most important thing is the African Union high implementation. They came with a proposal. African Union, these two countries, they almost entered into war because of the an area here of oil field. They clashed and they fought, actually almost like a war between the two countries. That resulted to the African Union to intervene and to come with a roadmap for them to resolve most of their issues. And if they fail to agree, including Abyei, then the African Union will come with a proposal, and that proposal should be final and binding on the parties. The Security Council also resolved it in Resolution 2046 to use Chapter 7. But what happened is that African Union is unable to pass this proposal to have a referendum next month because the Security Council, a division between the U.S. over Syria, and Russia, they're saying we cannot entertain these things to come to us because if it comes, we'll use veto. And China, which is actually exploiting the oil, is taking a very lukewarm position. So the Africans are actually fearing to take this issue to the Security Council because they know if they take it to the Security Council, they will not have any solution. Abyei is a test to the African Union institutions of their inability to act. But anyhow, so the focus of this study is really to measure the socioeconomic, physical, and psychological condition of the people of Abyei. And the main hypothesis is whether that the condition of the people, a favorable condition of the people, can correlate with a positive outlook to the peace, to reconciliation, and their attitudes to their neighbors, the Misiri, the Arab nomads. So the better condition, the more favorable views towards reconciliation and relation with their neighbors. So we use a lot of methodological things, about 320 random sampling in order to get a more representation of the people, stratification of the people so that you can get different sectors, and we use the screening for post-traumatic stress symptoms, which was created by this center. The focus on why we focus on economic conditions because there's a lot of discussion about the causation of civil war. And I think it has been seen now that the civil war is more caused by the living condition than by the ethnicity and religion. And Sudan is a good example. Sometimes people believe that the Sudan conflict is caused by ethnicity and religion, although a case of Darfur started questioning a lot of things, actually isolating a religion, but bringing up front the issue of ethnicity. But again, if you go deeper, you can get that the conditions of poverty tend to be the causation of the civil war. And then the post-traumatic stress disorder, this is the assumption is diminishing because it has a lot of profound impact on the people perception and also the way they take their decisions. And this illness is quite very important, especially for the post-conflict communities, because these are, when you come out from transition, you are going to deal with the legacy of the past, you want to build your livelihoods, you want to see how you deal with your families, and the whole lot of reconciliation. How can you deal with your enemies? And that's why it is very important to test this. So this is the whole thing is that the more you improve the conditions of the people, the more there's a possibility that people can look positive to the outlook, and the more they can be able to look for the political solution. Now, let me share with you some of the main findings. Almost 77% of the people lost their assets. I mean, especially livelihood assets. 84% lost their wealth assets, and almost about 98% actually lost their real assets. A big, huge loss for the people of IBA. In terms of their income levels, is almost 80% of the people have less than $80 and 62 a monthly earning of less than I think $130. So you could see clearly the level of poverty quite prevalent here. This is also another about the living conditions. About 50% of the sample they lack access to food, to food, water, and medicine. And also about 82% they don't have access to the housing. Physical and psychological well-being, 80% of the sample, either the children became ill, and 51% of the respondents either ill or injured, and 58% of women and 40% of men become ill. But the most important thing here is about 37.8% of the respondents met the criteria for PTSD, which is actually quite significant, quite high. Interestingly, it is even higher, almost twice, among the women than men, and that's a very serious. And actually, I saw this one whenever I go to ABA, you see how women are so frustrated, overreacting. Even the way they look to the normals, the Arab normals, is just unbelievable. In most cases, you expect the women to become more resilient, but in this situation, you are seeing the reverse. Actually, they're the one actually even determined to go to the north. Yeah.
Luka, I'm not familiar with the attacks in 2008, the details of it, but in 2011, the Army used very different tactics than it had used and the Masria in Darfur, for instance, in the sense that they seemed to want to terrify people to get them to move, but they didn't really kill many people compared to what they had done in other places. Their missions didn't seem to be killing so much as terrifying people and taking their belongings and displacing them. In 2008, did they use the tactics that they had used in other places that were much more violent than?
Actually, what they use, the oil itself in Abyei, this is where the oil is. The oil is actually north of Abyei. The oil fields are here. And what happened in 2008 and 2011, they targeted the people, and the people moved southwards here. Even they came here and they southwards, with the intention of trying to settle the Arab nomads in the north in the oil field, here in the oil field. It is exactly like what they're doing in the Janjaweed. But here they're very particular because they want to come and settle the people in the oil field. And they want to change the demographic structure of the area by having the Arab nomads settling them down. So when you have a referendum, then you'll come now, there will be a majority here. And then in 2011, when they attacked this area, when they attacked Abyei town, it was just a very clear case, looting all the assets of the people for almost 1 month, just looting everything in the area. So what they want to impose now is that a possibility for them, that Sudan government wants to divide this area in this way, like this, so that you carve out the oil field to be part, so you divide the area again. In actual fact, the area was this area, before we go to the court of arbitration, it was almost like this. There are a lot of oil fields here. Then when we went to the court decided to restrict it to the area of the Ngok Dinka exclusively. But even Sudan government accepted the arbitration, but they decided to come again and to claim further this area. So it's a very complicated situation, but they were very clear, targeting, scaring the people, pushing the people out, so that they settle the Arab nomads in the north to change the demographic structure of the area. So as I said, the most important thing is this: I think this has been consistently found also, that in most cases, women, they tend to experience this illness twice than men, and it's quite alarming because it's quite high among the women. And the problem with this one is that the very women we are talking about, they are quite the engine of reconciliation and peace. In Southern Sudan, I observed during the conflict when there was a division within the rebels movement, the women were the one actually encouraged the people to come together. And when you have such a high level of trauma among the women, you can make a judgment about this society itself, becoming so negative about their neighbors, become negative about the future, and that actually is a recipe for a prolonged despair, and then you cannot even affect the issue of coming together and the issue of reconciliation. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just ask a question on that? In the Canadian military, when I was working for the Department of Defense, we did a lot of studies on PTSD and occupational stress injuries,
yeah.
And actually getting people to be honest in the surveys and questionnaires was actually really difficult. I mean, do you think that those percentages are largely accurate for men or for women?
Beside this figure, because when they conducted the survey, I was having my own personal observation. And I remember in ABA itself, we have most of the traders, and I will come to it later on, most of the traders, they do come from the north. And there was an incident when some of these Arabs, they came to the town, and they have a mosque here. And when they came, they provoked the population. And I was amazed the way the women reacted than men. And I remember an incident when I used to go to northern side here. Women, they tend even to go ahead of men to a very risky places. And that's why seeing these results, and they're becoming so determined, unbelievable than men. And even the most difficult areas, they're the one actually going there. In fact, even they're the one started making trading with the Arab in Syria. And they took a very, so I'm not surprised based on my own personal observations and these results. And I think it has been found in many studies also, such a high level among women. But this one I think is a bit quite high. Now, if you look at their attitudes, and you can see clearly, but it's not that the margin is not that high. Women tend to see unwillingness to forgive the Syrians, the Arabs, because what happened to them is just they attacked in 2008, 2011, they took everything, although almost the same, but you could see clearly the negative attitude towards the. But it is this one is the one I was saying. In fact, what I observed, actually, women were more returning to Abyei than men, but you can see that attitude. They seem not to be indicating not to return to the area. This one is about the way they look to the final settlement of the area, of the political situation of Abyei. You could see almost 90% of the people, they have a very negative attitude, whether there will be a final resolution of Abyei. Even in terms of trading, it's a very high number. And actual fact, what happened is that Abyei area used to be a bridge, I could say a bridge, between Sudan and South Sudan. It used to have one of the largest markets in Sudan for the livestock, because the Dinka of the south, they would bring their cattle here, and then there will be these are one of the very big market here, and this cattle will be taken to Saudi Arabia and to the Arab world, and now look at the attitude of the people. Even they don't want to trade with the Arabs, and it's a very, and what happened is that the routing now changed, because what is happening, Abyei used to be, all the trading used to come through Abyei. Now people, they started looking for other options and away from Abyei, and actually losing a lot of opportunities because of this negative attitude in the area. Yeah.
Just on that, what is the economic structure for the Misri? I mean, how much of their livelihood comes from this trade? Because you would think that they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot if they're, in the long term, in a sustainable manner, if the customers or the trading partners don't want to deal with them. How much does that play into the Messeria mindset?
You know, that is a very good question, by the way. What happened, the nomadic patterns changed drastically in this area. And there's a bit of a commercialization that came to the pastoralists. The nomads that we are seeing today are not the very nomads that we used to see. They are becoming like laborers, actually looking after the cattle, and the owners of these cattle, they tend to stay in the northern side, because there's a very lucrative business happening and what is people are saying, actually, when you talk about the nomads, these are not the nomads. These are commercial cattle owners with the laborers. There are few of them who are actually now really still nomads. That's why when you talk about the reconciliation and the movement of these people say we need to talk with these traders rather than these cattle workers actually who are coming with these people, because the dynamics, I think the social dynamics actually change very much. What is likely to happen is that now, because of the tension along the border, they tend to stay now, because we have United Nations forces in Abyei. They're becoming even more secure here. And because this issue has not been resolved, and they have been seen as if these Arabs in Syria are against, especially after they kill the paramount chief of the Dinka, it's becoming so difficult for them even to go deeper. Actually, during the war, I mean, during the Sudan, United Sudan, they used to come even deep up to here, up to this area. Now they are constrained, they cannot go in that area. They're actually limiting themselves here because there's a very huge tension. The problem is that the Sudan government used them in Syria as a tool to complicate the issue of Abyei and actually forcing them to become very vulnerable. What we are going to see is that the livelihood patterns of this Syria is going to change drastically, because they are depending. I think along this border we have about 3 million cattle owners depending on the livelihood actually coming to the south here. And with the tension now, actually they are facing a very high risk, and there could be a lot of ways for them to adapt. Some of them, they started now abandoning the pastoralism and going to Khartoum, to the urban settings, so that they can start their new life. You see them, one of the laborers. What happened is that most of the southerners, they used to be workers in the north. So what is going to happen is that most of these pastoralists, they will lose these livelihoods, and they may go back to the. But you are right. It's an area that is one of the suggestion of the proposal is how can we look at the conditions of this Syria in order to develop them in their own areas as a way of mitigating these attitudes, but at the same time focusing on the Dinka so that they can look positively also to the Arab nomad. It's a very interesting area that we need to focus, because it has a lot of issues actually at stake here. So this is about the attitudes, and one of the things is just the gloomy attitude that people have, especially 90% of the people that believe that there's no any solution on the. But even the trading with Syria and even unwillingness to allow the Syria to migrate south of Abyei, because what is happening, these people, they come through Abyei, through here, and they go southward. There's a river here, They are now almost going for about 2 years. They are unable to cross this river. And it's actually exposing them even more to become very vulnerable. And the same thing is happening is that because the Messiri are being seen, the Arab Messiri are being seen as a problem in Abyei, that created a negative attitude along the border here. And it's so difficult for them to get in. And the moment they get in, there's these off-taking activities, they're being attacked, and it's creating a lot of problem because not resolving the issue of Abyei politically is creating a problem for Messiri to get even down to the south. Yeah, even they themselves imagine Hawalei. These the only people who are willing. About almost 98%. They don't see any reason why they should engage with to talk with the Messiri. When I was there, we decided to have a reconciliation among the communities because I was in charge of the area, and it was so bad, the negative attitude of the people, that we don't want to talk with these people. And this is a result of the trauma that we have been seeing. This is some of the correlation that we have done, but that's not the. But really, what is very apparent, just to conclude, in order to get you in case of any discussion, is the whole lot of the local peace, because in most cases any peace at the high level may not have any meaning at the local level. Abyei is a good example of you may need to look at a bigger solution, but actually the micro piece is quite important. The other one is the local communities themselves, because you need to adjust and see the values and the local structure that are quite important in order to realize peace and reconciliation at that level. By the way, markets tend to play a very important role. One of the things I observed during the war, actually some markets start coming up and becoming a center for conflict resolution and resolving issues. For example, I know this Messiri, they abducted not less than 20 to 40,000 children, women, for slavery. But through the markets, people managed to retrieve some of these children. And markets, I found them to be a quite important element in the.
I'm sorry, Luka, did you say that in the 2008-2011 attacks that they essentially kidnapped as many as 10,000 children? No.
This is during the entire war between Sudan and South. The entire war. Actually, a very good markets actually developed here. And it's quite one of the largest markets we have, actually becoming now a very, in a will area, in this, some here. Huge markets called Warawar, and developed during the war. And what happened, they're becoming a place for the peace building, because the communities of Arabs and Dinka, because of their interests, they started not only in terms of trading, but they started resolving some of their problem. But in actual fact, even the kids that have been abducted by the Messiri, they were retrieved back through the markets. And as one of the areas, I feel this is one of the institutions so important in building the relationship and reconciliation. And they start calling them peace markets. I think this one of the things that I feel very important is the trauma intervention and economic stabilization. They need to be linked together, and in the case of South Sudan, as I said, we tend to forget the trauma, but the way I'm seeing the South actually is a very traumatized communities, and that's why this aspect of trauma is quite important. In fact, even when we see most of the tension that are coming up now among the communities, between the communities of the South, is a reflection of these civil society groups are quite important. One of the things very important is the radio itself, FM radio. It's so powerful in terms of passing the message, because you have a very negative messages. It is through this radio that you can create an atmosphere, and then this your local institution. I think let me stop here, and thank you very much. In case you have questions. Douglas, do you have anything to know, or you later on?
Oh yeah, I just to highlight.
Okay.
During the relationship between what happened in South Sudan and what happened in Darfur, I think it is the same mechanism. What I've witnessed in Darfur is that the government, to enforce its counterinsurgency, used the Arab tribes.
Yeah.
And the conflict is basically because they think that, I don't know, this is an ideological problem which is high. You remember the relationship between Sadiq al-Mahdi and the group with Libya, and then how to build a belt of central sub-Saharan belt of Arab and so. But that is, it is a long story. But what happened in Darfur is that the African tribes were targeted specifically, while at the same area where they are living together, the Arab tents were not at all torched, while the African tribe villages were completely torched. That's one thing. The other thing is that during our study where we have been conducting in Darfur, the government forces and the Janjaweed forces were working together. According to the study we did, almost more than 30% of the occasion, the government forces and the Janjaweed forces were working together, executing an attack to villages and other areas. In other areas, the government Air Force will
together
precede the attack
with the Arab,
and then the Arab will attack. The consequences were so much drastic, but from our study we found that almost 60% of the raids were done by the Janjaweed, 23% by the government forces, and then the killing itself. The killing itself is almost done by the government forces, because they are using destructive weapons, not like the Janjaweed themselves. The Janjaweed, they just terrorize, they loot, they burn, and they rape, while the killing is basically by the government forces. This type of other types of trauma, like throwing young children into fire and detention in a very miserable situations where there is no access to basic services. This is done by the police and the government forces, basically. So I think the same attitude which is done in South Sudan, and I remember one of the areas I visited when I was in Nialo Hospital, a camp of displaced South Sudanese civilians, and due to very long starvation and lack of food and nutrition, this is the first time I discovered that there is scurvy living in the world. Where the last time it was in 1670s, there was never report about the scurvy. But we found that these people are dying because they are prohibited from any food related with vegetables or oranges or whatever containing vitamin C. So they develop scurvy, and many died because of that. And just a very simple treatment, we saved hundreds of them. I think the question of how this counterinsurgency is run, maybe we need to concentrate on that point. The killing is not just bullet killing, it is a way of starvation, diseases, lack of services, whatever, that kills more than what the international community is just saying, that very few have been killed. But we think that this is mortality related to war. And we have to make this figure. Because in the future, when we want to the community to reconcile, it depends on the documents you have.
That's true.
Is there any documents? Yeah. That's one of the reasons why we documented all the cases in South Darfur which had traumatized and displaced. And this may be a better proof in the future that this is what happened, and we need to reach a reconciliation point according to this statement and this document.
Yeah.
While this is what we are finding in South Sudan, there is no documentation. And
That's
so
true.
this is why everybody is denying.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think what you said is, the case of Abyei is a clear case how the Syria or the Arab generally have been used by the government to the level is creating a very perception. In actual fact, when you go deeper, these are the people who are looking for their own livelihoods, and they have been used by the government. It is only when, and that's why what we are saying to the people of Abyei, how much you have a negative attitude towards this Syria, you should know this is not the Syria. It is actually the government. And I think it is very important to widen our understanding so that because what is going to happen, actually the Arab tribes in Sudan are facing a big risk because of the policy of the government that they are taking the burden unnecessarily. Because we know the Arab nomads normally, what they want just access to water and pasture. But it has been politicized in such a way they're becoming a tool of the government. And the people, and they're paying the price because these people here, they don't see the government. They see just only the Arab nomads. And it's going to be a big problem along this border of Sudan and South Sudan. How can we unpack and let people to look positive to each other? And because sometimes the policy of the government, as you rightly put, is quite, along this area, we have people who are actually living here. They are not known. When I was in Abyei, some kids started returning. Those people got abducted under the slavery. They don't know even that the Spees or Southern Sudan actually becoming independent. They don't know. They are used now to look after the cattle of these nomads. It is when they get into contact with other people, they become awakened. So I was there, and a child came and said, from where? I was working with X and Y. And even I went here, I went further here, and during the migration, and you could see Dinka, really Dinka. I mean, black African with these people, but they tend to behave as if they are not at all Dinka. They become subjected to the level they accepted this situation. It's a bad situation, And that's why for us to normalize this relationship along this border, we have a lot of work to do, especially at the level of the communities, at the level of civil society organizations, at the level of dissemination. Actually, I talked with the USAID whether we can have an FM radio here. And the idea is actually it's not only for the Dinka, but even to educate even the Syria, so that they understand what are we talking about. The proposal the African Union put, which the Syria are rejecting, is a very simple thing. One is that the oil being discovered here, they use now to get about 2%. The African Union said the Syria here north, they will get about 20%. 20% of the oil of Abyei. And what the government saying? No. We want the land. The whole area, we want it. We don't want the referendum of the people of Abyei. They don't know. I remember Mbeki, the president of South Africa, went to decide to talk with this Syria. And they were saying, no, we are against this proposal. But he asked them, do you know what is in the proposal? They said, we don't know. Except these people, they must not have a referendum. And then he started telling them about the very fact that this proposal will allow you not only to pass in Abyei with your cattle, but you should come even down here. The oil here, you'll get this one. Even some political representation in there. Then they become shocked. So these are the people really, they don't have access to information that are used badly by the government. And they don't see something positive. And it is we in this area, whether in Darfur or in Abyei or along these areas, how can we even change our way of looking to these communities? And it's so difficult because it's somebody who did a very bad thing to you, and for you to change it, to look positive to them, it's a big problem. And for me, the real change is not is these people here, although the suffering is quite high. And even for the Darfur to look at the Arabs that are being used by the Sudan, simply.
Luka, during the war years, that is between the Sudanese government and the SPLA, it was well known that Westerners are using Sudanese as intermediaries could go to slave markets and buy people's freedom. Is there kind of no difference between people kind of captured during the war and the kind of practice of calling people slaves, or are these different phenomena? That,
you know, I have my own way of looking at it. Actually, I could say it was another industry created. Because what used to happen along these, especially these markets I was telling you, so you will have people believing that the children abducted to slavery, and then they will make a mockery, in a sense. Children will be brought, these are abducted women, and then the money will be changing hands. And in actual fact, it was not a real thing. It was not a real thing. And I think people just abuse that thing, because there's no way you can, and we were having some information also that one was not the real thing. As we talk, and I said, we are still along these areas, we are still these people at large. It's 20,000 still. They are not. In actual fact, there was an organization, an NGO, documenting the names even of the people abducted, children, women, the names, and it was given to Bashir himself for them to start retrieving. And this one was a genuine one. He started retrieving some of them. After the secession, some of them, they start coming back to the south, but the majority are still here at large. And and that's why during the negotiations on the nationalities, people were very concerned about the people who are in Khartoum, the displaced people, the refugees, the South Sudan refugees. And it took us a lot of discussion to put into the text the issue of these people who are still in the hands of the nomads as slaves. And that will created a big of tension to become, government of Sudan was reacting to it in such a way. So we have a real serious issue on that issue. Douglas, in case you, any reflection on?
I think we're out of time. I do want to say I think not enough attention has been paid to the effects of trauma, and a lot of aid programs from the U.S., Canada, Europe, etc., have focused on institution building,
exactly,
and have ignored that human rights atrocities are purposefully traumatic, and the use of fear is a trauma strategy, and that we've been playing with only half of our mind if we neglect that aspect. So I'm really happy to see that you're seeing that as an important part of the transition. And at some point I'd like to hear more about what you have seen as effective interventions in that level. I've been involved in that, my organization, working on mental health interventions, but I would love to hear more about what you see potentially operating in that area or in other places as part of a transition mix of work.
One of the things, seeing the transitions, is that I was involved, and I think I said it before, I was involved in the assessing the needs assessment, joint assessment mission of the United Nations, World Bank, and the two governments. And it's a very elaborate process to assess the post-conflict needs. And it did not come to our mind at all that we have a problem about trauma. It didn't at all. So the whole thing about the institutions at the national level and nothing at the local level. You know, one of the things that I found is that, and this link also the issue of nation building, is that always the state building seems to be the dominant thinking. Usually what happens in the transitions also is that you are prepared to be in the mood of development. So as if you are jumping from a humanitarian situation to a developmental mood. So even I remember when we started with the World Bank, we're very passionate that here the peace immediately a very large scale development, roads, whatnot, and we tend to forget the NGOs. These are the people who these organizations started working for a long period of time in the war. They have institutional memory. They have the capacity to deal with the people. And we tend to forget them and we jump to these big giants. World Bank, IMF, whatnot. And we forget about these people. And actually they are so good in managing the transition. And especially if you focus on it is through the micro level, you need to have these NGOs. They will be able actually to help dealing with these issues of the trauma. And in fact, even our understanding of the trauma, whether there's a trauma or not, it's just we talk about it, but we did not even document like what you said, Dr. Isa. So it's not been documented. I mean, the point I want to make here is that and what we are seeing now in the South, eruption of more tension and conflict between and among the people. And when I said about this, indigenous counterinsurgency left a lot of wounds. And we tend to believe that by having schools, health, and other services, that we are actually, the other thing will be solving them. But we don't know these ones are actually hidden, and we need to really to address them. I don't have, I want to use the case of RBA, whether by focusing to the local institutions, by focusing on the local structure and traditions, whether you will be able to have a positive attitude of the people to themselves and to the bigger picture, the outlook. And by doing so, but even not only from the side of people of Dinka, BA, but even the nomad themselves. What are the conditions that we create from these communities that they seem to be quite look as if they are enemies, so that you can be able to create those conditions that will allow them to look positively. And trauma for me is a very a central point for building peace at the grassroots, but even building even a sense of a identity that you are confident of yourself, building a sense that you can look positive to your neighbors, because these are critical issues that I feel how much you do it at the national level and you don't do it at the local level, you are bound to face a lot of problems. And this is the challenge I see and even for you to talk about the reconciliation, about even the justice, it's difficult. It will be difficult.
Just a question on trauma then and the approach that you're thinking of. I mean, you've mentioned the high proportions of people that have very negative attitudes about the Nigeria, for instance. You've also mentioned people with very extreme cases of mental health issues, PTSD. Do you recommend approaching those two groups in different ways? Are there different changes that they have to go through to heal? And for perhaps populations that have had a very critical sort of stress, which has led to PTSD, do they need recognition of what happened to them actually?
I think so. I think that's why truth telling is very important. You know, one of the good things about this study, the very fact that talking to these people, just asking them questions and to air out their stories, is so powerful, and it's quite. But even sometimes we need to not to look at these issues at the individual level, but even at the community level, because sometimes you may need to have a certain measures at the individuals at the community. But even one of the thing I found in Abia is there's a very high level of people now going to the church. unbelievable. You get the churches now becoming so full. And I was trying to reflect to why. And before they used to go to the church, but now it's quite high because this is an area whereby you get a process of healing and becoming the last resort. You go to the church so that you get yourself, and it's a pattern actually in most of the South Sudan now, because I could see a clear shift. I'm becoming a very religious society. But it is exactly because people they look for a space, and they see, for example, the church seems to be quite a very important area for them and one of the people I believe may be having the churches to be a platform for counseling at the community level, but even at the individual level is so important. And I think there's a lot of, leave alone the counseling in other, but even the local institutions themselves. I mean, the local traditional institutions. Because sometimes you have the courts is where you settle most of the tension and conflict. But you get becoming a platform whereby people, they also express themselves. And becoming a very attracting point whereby they can be.
Yeah, perhaps the oldest genocide, and yet still people are talking about it as maybe it is not because it happened even before the genocide. But I'm not stuck in semantics. So for me, that it was a genocide. I met the last survivor of the Armenian genocide, and at the time he was 98 years old. Perhaps he was 2-3 years old when the genocide took place. But because he was there and he heard it fresh from his family and all that, he came and he spoke in the commemoration that we did. And I felt that he was speaking in a reconciliatory tone, and then asking people to come together. And he says, I lived long enough to see that all these grudges and things. However, the 17-year-olds, the 20-year-olds, and they were angry. They were talking about it as if it happened yesterday. And the only conclusion, just to make a long story short, the conclusion that came to me is the fact that this issue was never went through redress. There was nobody who, until today, it was even contested whether it was genocide or not.
I see.
So that remained there for a whole century. Staying, simmering, more and more people becoming angry because the memories are fresh in the minds of generations, and it became hereditary. They take it child from family, and so I think it is important the issue of redress. It's important the issue of reconciliation. It is important the issue of justice, be it a hybrid or through the ICC or through local courts or whatever. I'm not married to any type of, but the delivery of justice and reconciliation to this community is so important. It is part, I think, humbly, that it is part of the whole treatment of the psychological impact for individuals and communities.
Actually, when we brought these two communities of the Missourian and Dinka, one of the things we stressed is for them to recognize the atrocity committed first. But not only this, because there are some cases that are known, and it could be a process at least to have as you rightly put, the justice. And one of the things I remember in the first meeting with these communities, it was for the first time the Missouri to come out and to apologize. But we know apology is one thing, and the real feeling. And I could see a big relief for the first time to apologize about what happened, and it was a big relief for the Dinka, for them to hear for the first time the Missouri to accept the atrocities that they committed to the Dinka. And you are absolutely right, the truth-telling, documenting some of these things, and actually for them to sit and to vomit it out is so important. But even after that one, if there's some culprit, I think it would be a good example for the people to see. And that's why I see the reconciliation for me is the stage when we go through those processes rather than jumping to it. And through this process, I could see a healing process, whether truth-telling or justice-seeking, or the way you adjust and then amend the reconstruction. Because these are the things now the communities will come now. Now let us now reconcile. And because I'm seeing very clearly, even in South Sudan, you jump all these things you want to come to this reconciliation. So we have a commission now being established. It's a big issue. And actually for Dinka and the Syria and even for Darfur, and the Darfur and the Arabs.
Blue Nile.
These are the things, especially the transition. I mean, these areas are it's just unbelievable. It's just a huge problem that we are facing these two countries. And these are going to affect so I fully agree with you, the need of justice and truth-telling. Yeah. Muhammad Isa.
I think given the scale of trauma, the first attempt by many is to think about processes and hope for healing.
Yeah.
But I think that redress is an important issue, justice is an important issue, but those are also social processes. And I think
Yes,
about
sir.
trauma and pain is very individualized. You are alone with the pain, and it's one of its strengths as a tool of repression is that it forces people into themselves instead of into their community. And so attempts to find ways of re-engaging the community are very important, but at the same time, trauma is not only a result of an act, it's not a set of symptoms that simply can be addressed through political and social processes. We know more and more that trauma changes biology.
It's quite
It
interesting.
changes the nature of the brain, and that stays with the person, and you need, in order to actually address the long-term effects of trauma, which also means affecting how they will have an impact on the second and third and fourth generations.
Yeah.
Has to also address this, the kinds of individual work that helps an individual restructure their brain. There's a lot of good evidence on this. Charlie and I were just talking about a study with mice, which simply confirmed what we've already known from longitudinal studies of Holocaust survivors and their children and their grandchildren having higher rates of suicide and clinical depression. We're seeing it in places in Africa where we've worked over 15 years. It is, and I think it's one of the most alarming aspects of the power of human rights atrocities is that they're helping to shape cultures for the future. So it's really important that we have political people thinking about creating processes, creating justice, but also don't forget that there's a health program. There has to be something that helps individuals themselves. The trauma has different effects on different people based on their biology, based on their culture, based on a large number of things. The studies I generally see with highly traumatized people in refugee camps, there's no real difference between men and women. And so one would ask, why was there so much different here? Perhaps because the women were subject to rape and men weren't. So it could have been more generalized as a specific trauma aimed at women and not. But even highly traumatized populations still have people who don't get PTSD.
Yeah.
And we're still trying to understand
Why
that is. I think one of the big dangers of people who are coming to the study of it is that we see a lot of projects of people who have a rather amateurish view of what the science is of PTSD. And there's a whole set of propositions that we do women's sewing circles or we do this and that as a way of dealing with PTSD, and they have no effect. There was even an attempt in Kenya after the bombing to intervene with rapid psychological interventions after a trauma. The truth of the matter is the studies of these indicate that people are more likely to have mental health problems after that sort of intervention. But the idea that someone picked up was, oh, this is a new tactic to intervene, and rather than looking at the science, they just picked up the tactic and transported it in a new area thinking it's going to work. So I think one of the importance of you talking about this is also to get people to grapple with what it actually means and how this will affect the long-term health. And as you very ably pointed out, the repercussions on development are really high, but there's also people who are highly traumatized tend to be often panic-driven, highly provoked by anxiety. They tend to be often quite paranoid.
Yes.
All the things which make reconciliation
Impossible.
very difficult. And so I just want to caution that
That's true.
this is a very complex problem, and it's not something that one or two processes,
Regulation.
wouldn't it be good if we did this, are going to dealt with it. It requires a very comprehensive strategy to try to address.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point. Yeah.
Can you just follow up on the question?
Yeah.
So, how do you see this could be done? Would it be by sort of training, special, medical teams on the specific issues? At the same time, implementing
Yeah.
more what
Oh,
you've
yeah.
been talking about, but more if you focus more on the sort of medical health issue, would you sort of be training the local medical teams to deal with it, or?
That could be certainly a part of it, but I think there's a lot of room for experimentation. The importance is to measure it and find out what works and what doesn't. I worked for 24 years as the head of the Center for Victims of Torture in Minnesota. So we developed a set of projects. I thought that was you. So we developed projects. We were asked to go into refugee camps and work. And the first one we went was in Guinea for Sierra Leone. Okay. The country of Sierra Leone had one psychiatrist in the entire country, the only trained mental health person there. So how do you develop a massive program to work with refugees, camp of 300, 400,000 people when there's no one? So our approach was we took in 5 PhD trauma specialists, and we hired eventually 120 refugees. Usually there were teachers, some had been nurses, and so forth. And we spent 10 years every day training them and supervising them so that they became clinicians. And when the camps emptied out and people returned home into the areas where the trauma had come from, then our staff simply returned home, which meant we started a community mental health program, but we could never have done it with the intensity of the training. Turned out the refugee camp was a terrific place to work, because people were bored, they wanted something useful to do, they wanted to make a contribution, they were right here. They could see lots of clients, they could get feedback quite a bit, they could form groups. And that was a useful experiment, but not only that, it demonstrated measurable changes. And so, but that's still hard to do, and one of the problems it's hard to do, we were asked to go to 12 other countries, and we said, well, there's just not enough people in the world to train people this way. So you have to invest in it, and it's a long-term issue. It's going to affect generations. But yes, for example, every medical school in the world should have something about trauma. Every human rights worker should be trained in the issue of trauma, and at least on self-protection. We're trying to distribute a paper today on vicarious trauma.
Yeah, these are the articles here. Doug, a follow-on question. The Jesuits, who were the leaders of the University of Central America and El Salvador, maybe you can just put those by the door there on the couch. That's an article about secondary trauma of the kind that service providers can get by dealing with people who were traumatized all the time. But in El Salvador, after the murder of the Jesuits, the university made a commitment to develop community-based processes for treating PTSD that were really affiliated with the church. And I was curious if the Center for Victims of Torture ever evaluated any of those, or are you familiar with some of those community-based processes that they were using in El Salvador?
Yes. And I think that, I'm afraid that, I thought many of them were based on wishful thinking. And some of it because people involved, for example, rejected the idea that PTSD was a valid concept, that it was a Western concept, which I think was an incredible misreading of what PTSD is as a diagnosis. It's just a work tool, but because they had a political agenda of rejecting this concept as an imperialist concept, I don't think they actually responded well to the research and the kinds of things that we needed to do.
Good.
I don't think you have to medicalize this, but at the same time, you have to understand that there's been a lot of important research in the medical community that ought to influence. The single most effective rapid treatment program for PTSD seems to be eye movement therapy, and they have no idea why it works, only that it does. So.
I mean, going back to another kind of African experience of reconciliation, the example that comes to mind is Rwanda, and what happened there. Are there any comparisons that we can learn from what happened in Rwanda and what's happening here?
We will be having a case of Rwanda. I think, the next one on, just a reminder to see what are the lessons we can learn. But even the one of South Africa also. That's why we want to have a session here. And that's why I want to see whether the one of South Africa is too good to be an example for others. Actually, even in South Sudan, they are struggling now. What would they do with the reconciliation process? And I think they have a very big debate now. But that's why we pick those ones, so that what are the lessons we can learn from those. And especially for Sudan, is a nation that is facing a lot of problems. Like what we are telling you about the border is just this other aspect of the whole. I mean, because of the way I'm seeing that the level of trauma along the border is just terrible. And these are the people going to, leave alone the political differences. But here you have a community that is badly affected. And the other one going to be the basis upon which you build the relationship with the two countries. And it's just a huge, and as Douglas said, it's a long term, and I agree. You know, I went to Australia and I saw Aborigines, and I was a very clear pattern of how you get them just either drunk, they see quite strength. And that's the first time I start asking myself, what is, and you get the government is giving them a lot of resources to assist them, and yet you tend to see any changes.
Not doing it right away.
Yeah, and you are absolutely right. It's a long term. You need to invest heavily for the time to come. And if you have this nation, these people here along this border facing this problem, you could see the future of the relationship of these countries.